All right, you guys, I was just finishing up and I think I had a bad connection, so it stopped recording. So let me just finish up example 3. I just started it. So occasionally warning flares fail to ignite. A consumer advocacy group is to investigate a claim against a manufacturer of flares brought in by a person who claims that the proportion of defectives is much higher than the proportion of 0.1 or 10% claimed by the manufacturer. A large number of flares will be tested. P represents the true proportion, it's the parameter of defective flares made by this manufacturer. If the null hypothesis is rejected, charges of false advertising will be filed against the manufacturer. So again, if you look at my little arrow system, we're saying this is the truth, but this is what we found. That would be the type 1. And type 2, we're saying this is the truth, but this is what we found. Okay, so what would be a type 1 error in this context? A false positive. We're saying, okay, well, this is the truth. The actual proportion of defective flares is at that 10%. But we found more than 10% are defective. So here I'm going to say actual proportion of defective flares is 10%, but we mistakenly found more than 10% defective. Okay, so what would that mean? That would mean what it's saying here. Right, we're going to have charges that are unnecessarily filed. Right, we are mistakenly, unnecessarily filing charges against the manufacturer. Okay, what about a type 2 error? Right, that would be your false negative. So we're saying that this is true, but this is what we found. So the actual proportion of defective flares has increased, right, more than 10%. But we mistakenly found that it was staying at 10%. Okay, so what issue could that bring? Well, if you were in an emergency situation, right, it's more likely that you'll have a flare that does not work. Okay. All right, lastly, example 4, I want you guys to actually try these on your own. I'll read through it, of course, as always, but I want you to do your best to answer the questions. Okay. Employees at a health club do a water quality test in the club's swimming pool. If the level of contaminants are too high, then they temporarily close the pool to perform a water treatment. The null and alternative hypotheses are given below. So again, let me just remind you my arrows here and here. So type 1, we're saying this is the truth, but this is what we found. Type 2, we're saying this is the truth, but this is what we found. So I want you to read through A, B, and C, answer them. So pause right now, answer A, B, and C, and then unpause and I will go over them. Okay, here we go. So type 1 error. we know that it would be that the water quality is acceptable, but we are finding that it's not. So what would be a consequence here? So when I read through my options, here club closes the pool when it needs to be closed. Well, no, because the water quality is actually acceptable, but we're finding that it's not. So I need the one that says that. Club closes the pool when it doesn't need to be closed. Absolutely, that is what would happen, right? So if I just read it back, right, the water quality is fine, but we found that it's not. What would happen? They're going to close the pool when they didn't have to. All right, B. What would be the consequence of a type 2 error in this setting? So here again, that means that the water quality is actually not okay, but we found that it's okay. So let's see which one addresses that. So club closes the pool when it needs to be closed. Well, that's not true, right? We're saying it's not acceptable, but we're finding that it's just fine. So it's not 1. The club closes the pool when it doesn't need to be closed. Well, again, no, because we're finding that that water quality is acceptable. So that one's out. So 3, the club doesn't close the pool when it should actually be closed. That's what's happening here. We're finding that this is the truth, right? That the water quality is not acceptable, but we're finding that it's okay for people to swim in. So that is the issue we are facing. 3, the club does not close the pool when it should have been closed. So for C, in terms of safety, which error has more dangerous consequences in this setting? So type 1, the consequence is that the pool is closed for treatment when it doesn't necessarily need to be closed. Or type 2, the consequence here is that people swim in contaminated water. So in this context, absolutely number 2 is more concerning, right? That we have people here that are swimming in contaminated water. All right, I hope that makes sense. I hope you guys are all doing well. As always, have a wonderful rest of your day.